Welcome back. Here I am in front of my map again. Perhaps you watched the mini lesson, perhaps you didn't, but I'm sharing this map from the classroom. I've outlined a few other little things on there. This is going to be a lot shorter because I've just kind of outlined more of them. So I did outline South Carolina and Tennessee a little darker in red. I wanted to point out Arkansas though, because that was the point of chapter 5. Remember that when we read yesterday that Jethro has met this Jake Roscoe, and he's asking about the battle at Pea Ridge, which occurred in Arkansas. So I did outline Arkansas here in red because it was considered to be a southern state. They seceded from the Union after the fall of Fort Sumter, but it was a win for the North. So this little blue dot up here with Arkansas, so you know from southern Illinois to there, it's not too far, and there's the little description here. General Samuel Curtis, in a determined effort to drive the Confederates from Missouri, pursued Price to here, where he defeated the combined forces of Price and Van Dorn. This battle ended serious Confederate operations in Missouri. So even though they had seceded, the Union is starting to push through into the South, starting with Arkansas. All right, so I'm done talking about the map, and let's take a look at our questions for chapter 5. We're going to continue to read today. So let me share those questions. Yesterday we were able to answer questions 1 through 4. So let's take a look at number 5. What did Sam Gardner give Jethro and why? 6. What trouble did Jethro have in Newton? 7. Why did Mr. Milton want Jethro to leave early? 8. What happened after Jethro passed the Burdow place? 9. What happened to Jethro and Dave Burdow by the bridge? 10. Why was Roscoe muttering angrily at his gate? And 11. What did Jethro leave out of his original story to the family? Once again, I'm not sure if we'll get all the way through the chapter today, but I wanted to go through all of those questions just in case. So you should have your book at home with you. Please get it out and read along with me. Let's take a look. We left off on page 72, and we'll start with the first full paragraph. Sometimes the wagon wheels sank deep in the mud of a low, wet spot along the road. Now and then a wheel passed over a stone or a stump hidden by weeds and tangled vines, and the wagon with its load tilted precariously. Jethro maintained the stoic calm of a farm-bred boy as the wagon swayed. He kept his small, hunched frame in a position of untroubled assurance, whistling a little now and then to prove to himself that his nerves were as nearly iron-like as he wanted to believe they were. A quarter of a mile beyond the wood stretch, the road led past the Burdow place. So let's pause for a second to remember who the Burdows are. Do you remember the story of Mary's death? There was a Travis Burdow that had shot the gun. And it went through kind of the whole family history of the Burdows, that they're just not trusted. This name is going to be very important, not only in this chapter, but as we continue on. So you want to remember that Burdow name. The name so closely associated with Mary's death was one that was never mentioned at home and was perhaps more evil to Jethro by the very fact that it was so carefully shunned. That morning, as he looked at the sagging roofs of the houses and barn, the general clutter of the ne'er-do-well in the barnyard, he felt a dread as if some evil lay close to the ground on its belly and peered out at him. The physical dangers of the road through the woods he could meet calmly, but his heart pounded as he looked toward the Burdow place, and he urged his team to trot until they were well beyond it. It was nearly 11 o'clock when he drove into Newton, the weather-beaten old county seat lying on the cliffs above the Embarrass River. In summer, soft skies, hundreds of full-leaf trees, and the winding river combined to give the little town an air of grace, a trace of charm that surmounted the basic ugliness. On that morning in late March, when Jethro drove into town, there was no beauty in Newton to soften the view of muddy streets and the stark bleakness of bare trees and unpainted box-like cabins. But there were people moving up and down the wooden sidewalks. smoke rising from 200 or 300 chimneys. And for a boy accustomed to the loneliness of an isolated farm, the gentle bustle of the place was exciting and full of wonder. The town was built around a square in the manner of Midwestern county seats, with the jail dominating the center. This was a small log building with outdoors, where the occupants made their reluctant entrance by way of a trap door in the roof. On the four sides of the square surrounding the jail, there were 2 feed stores, a harness shop, 2 general stores, a newspaper office, and 3 saloons. There was a restaurant too, where cooking was done over an iron stove instead of a fireplace. Jethro had eaten there once when he came to town with Bill and Shadrach. It had been a wonderful experience, and he looked at the place wistfully as he passed. His father, of course, would never consider spending good money for the extravagance of eating in a restaurant, and Jenny had placed an apple in her brother's pocket, together with a slice of pork between 2 pieces of cornbread for his noon meal. Well, one did not quarrel with the food, which he was blessed to receive. But one could not help sighing a little at the good things of life with which he was not blessed. Down on the river at the outskirts of town, there was the mill, where Jethro drove first and bargained with the grain according to his father's instructions. Later, at Gardner's general store, the chickens were weighed and exchanged for the calico, and thread that Jenny wanted, and mittens for himself. With the money from the corn, he bought first the coffee, 10 pounds of sleek, plump beans in a heavy canvas bag, then the sugar, nails, axe handle, and tobacco. He watched Sam Gardner bring out a can of coal oil for another customer and guard against the possibility of the oil splashing out by fixing a lump of gumdrop candy over the spout. The waste of such precious material cut Jethro like a knife. Maybe Sam Gardner understood the look on the boy's face. At all events, he scooped up a handful of gumdrops and put them in the package with the other things. So there's our answer to the first question. What is it that Sam Gardner has done? So he's pouring out oil for another customer, and it has one of those spouts on it. And it's possible that the spout could leak. So to stop it from leaking, he's used candy, gumdrop candy. I love those spiced gumdrops. Oh my goodness, they're so good. But I think that's what Jethro was thinking. At that time, candy was absolutely a luxury. And to see him using it to just to stop the oil instead of being able to eat it, he must have an expression on his face. And Sam sees it and thinks, oh, well, he's going to be a paying customer. Throws him a little candy. Okay, so there's your answer for that question. All right, let's take a look at page 74. A half dozen men sat around the fireplace at one end of the store or leaned against the counters and cracker barrels. Jethro recognized Ross Milton, the red-haired editor from the county paper. Milton was crippled with arthritis, and his face had lines of suffering in it. But Jethro noticed that his voice was crisp and decisive, and that there was an air of assurance about him that set him apart from the other men. He was watching the editor curiously when suddenly the name Burdow struck his ears, and he realized that a silent, burly giant of a man on the outer edge of the circle was the father of Travis Burdow. The man looked as if he had lived in filth for a lifetime, and Jethro felt a loathing that was new to him. He tried not to look in Burdow's direction, but time and again his eyes went back, even at the cost of a great unrest inside him. So keep in mind, we had that vocab word, loathing, that may be new to some of you, but it's a hatred. There's such a strong hatred inside of him just because of the name. The men paid little attention to Jethro as he made his purchases. Finally, though, one of them slapped the boy's leg playfully with a folded newspaper when he approached the group for one of the items on his list. "What might your name be, son?" he asked cheerfully. "I'm Matt Crichton's boy. Name's Jethro." Some of the men glanced at Dave Burdow, who started slightly at the name and stared at Jethro from small, deep-set eyes. "Well, young Crichton, is your pa in town with you today?" the first speaker asked casually after a short silence. No, sir. I brought the team in by myself. Jethro cleared his throat self-consciously. It wasn't any trouble for me at all, he added. Some of the men around the fire grinned broadly, and Jethro saw one of them wink at the man next to him. Dave Berdow did not grin. Neither did another red-faced young man who had put his foot on the rung of a chair and now leaned forward a little, looking coldly at Jethro. Seeing your pa ain't here to answer, I wonder if you'd be a mind to tell us where your brother Bill is these days. Some folks around here allows he's down south shooting our boys alongside the Rebs. Is it your understanding that that's what he's doing? We ain't heard from Bill since he left, Jethro answered. His eyes were wide in his thin face. Well now, that's a purty answer, the man sneered. Only trouble is, it don't quite satisfy a lot of us. Turned suddenly to look across the store at Berdow. You know, Dave, Matt Crichton talked to the boys into sparing Trav's worthless hide a few years ago. If Bill Crichton ever shows his face around these parts again, maybe you'll have the chance to talk us into sparing him. Berdow didn't look at the man. He gathered up some bags of groceries and walked out of the store stiffly, almost as if he expected a blow in the back. The editor struggled to get his crutches under his arms. Another shot of whiskey, Wortman, and maybe you'll have enough spunk to pick on someone who can fight back. You know that Berdow hasn't a friend in the county, so you're safe in giving him a kick. I might add that tormenting a young boy doesn't take either courage or brains. Another man spoke up. All right, Red, so the boy is just a kid. I'm not for tormenting, but I'm ready to let him know that a lot of folks around here take it pretty dim that Bill Crichton hightailed it off to the Rebs. Then let folks keep their quarrel with Bill. Matt has 2 or 3 sons in the Union Army. Why should he and his family suffer for Bill's actions? If the editor of the county paper ain't so against freedom of speech, could I just put one more question to this young'un? Without waiting for a reply, the man called Wortman turned again to Jethro. What I want to ask you is this. Is your pa good and down on Bill? Does he teach your brother is a skunk that deserves shooting for going against his country? Jethro felt a great weakness. He had to steady himself against the counter for a second, and when he spoke, the words were the first ones that occurred to him. My pa don't teach me one way or the other. He knows that I think more of my brother than anybody else in the world, no matter where he is. And that's all I've got to say to you. He looked directly at the man with an anger that dissipated his weakness. Dissipated, it made the weakness go away because he's so angry. Somebody clapped, and Guy Wortman's face grew vicious. He took a step toward Jethro, but one of the men caught his arm. So he's a great man, is he? Reb lover or not, he's the best man you've ever knowed? He spun furiously toward the man who held his arm. What's the matter with you, Ben Harris? You got Copperhead streak in you too? Folks around here are so all fired sure that Mike Crichton is a solid citizen. Well, I ask you to notice that he's not talking down his ornery traitor of a son to young smart aleck here. There was a whiteness around the editor's mouth as he slapped a crumpled hat on his red head. There isn't trouble enough in this country for you, is there, Guy? So Guy Wortman is his name. You'd better get out and do your patriotic duty. Kick up some more mob violence. That's your forte, you know. Get in on any killing you can drum up, so long as your own hide is safe. Sam Gardner, standing behind his counter, nodded at Milton's words. His round face was troubled, and he cleared his throat several times before he spoke. I go along with what Red says, Guy. There ain't any great big reason that I know of or why you can't join up yourself instead of loafing around drunk in my store. Maybe you'd ought to keep that mouth shut of yourn. Maybe you'd ought to keep that mouth of yourn shut a little tighter, Sam. You and Red Milton, both of you. Guy Wortman stood glaring at the storekeeper a moment and then added, I'm getting out of your store. I ain't saying what else I'm doing, but I'm getting out. And I'm going with you, Guy, one of the men said, getting to his feet. He turned belligerently when he reached the door. I got no use for thieving bird owls, he said, as if a sudden idea had to be aired before he left. But I'll say this, Trav Birdow is a Union soldier. I don't think you'd round up a mob so easy to go again him if it was a matter between Trav and the Crichtons this year. He went outside then, close upon Workman's heels. The editor stood facing the other men in the store with rage in his eyes. Sam Gardner went over and laid his hand on Milton's shoulder. Now calm down, Red. They ain't neither one of them worth shooting. You know that. They sure ain't worth another one of them heart attacks of yourn. So that whole little description, this argument that Jethro has with these men is the trouble that he's having in Newton. So what is it that I want you to summarize? What is it that these men are upset about? How does Jethro respond? And let me just make sure that that's all the questions asking. So that was number number 6. What trouble did Jethro have in Newton? So just describing that particular situation. All right, we're going to read a little bit more today. Keep going. And we're on 77, right about here where my cursor is. He turned then to Jethro, who stood beside the counter, his body hunched together as if in an effort to make himself as inconspicuous, kind of not noticeable as possible. I'm sorry that you've had to hear mean talk like this, son. It was bad, all around bad. But you done right to stand up for your brother. I might not like what Bill done, but I can't help feeling you was right in standing up for him. Yes, sir. Jethro nodded weakly and began gathering up his bundles. You starting for home soon, young Crichton? That was the editor. Soon as I load up and get my team watered and fed. Milton threw himself All right, so because I'm having an internet connection error, I'm not sure if that's interrupting my video, so I'm going to stop it for just a minute and we'll come back.